Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on today's webinar where we have, again, great attendance. We had almost 200 people registered for this one as well. Thanks for joining us. We have Jonathan Marashlian on here who's going to be going over some important updates that I know everybody's been thinking about and had fielded even personally a lot of questions on this. So thanks again, Jonathan, for joining us from the CommLaw group. What we're going to do here is give everybody about 30 more seconds to join and get settled. And then we're going to kick right off. And just a reminder, this will be recorded. So if you do have any team members or if you have to jet out early or whatever the case is, this will be recorded and distributed after. So you'll be able to reference it there. But we'll give everybody about another 15, 20 seconds here.
So Dan, I understand we have a pretty healthy audience.
We do, yeah, and actively joining. So this is good stuff. Good to see that everybody's concerned and aware.
Lots of fear, confusion, uncertainty.
Yeah, FUD, good old FUD. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and kick off without further ado. So I do want to, before I hand it on over here to Jonathan in a second, I do want to point out, if you do have any questions, please drop them down in the bottom right. There's a questions option, and we'll try and live answer those on the screen here if we have time towards the end. But without further ado, Jonathan, let me kick it over to you if you want to introduce yourself to the audience, and we'll kind of go from there.
You bet. Thanks, Dan, and thanks to everybody at the Viirtue team, Melissa, for working with us to get the slide deck prepared. Well, today we're going to be talking about robocall mitigation. More specifically, we're going to talk about two ideas that are becoming central to the way voice service providers manage their risks. Know your customer and know your upstream provider. KYC and KYUP. Couple more acronyms to add to the old acronym soup of operating in the telecom space. They just keep on piling up. So now, again, those terms can sound a little bit like compliance jargon, but it might sound like there's a form that you need, checklists, a file that you need to keep somewhere in case somebody asks for it. But that's not really what's going on at the FCC. It's not really where enforcement's going. So the better way for everybody to think about what KYC is this. It's a risk control system. And it starts before the customer sends traffic. It continues throughout the life of that relationship with the customer. It gives you a way to act quickly when something doesn't look right. So that's the theme for today. It's not paperwork for paperwork's sake. It's not bank grade compliance programs for every single small service provider, but it's more of a practical operating model. It's one that's going to help you know enough, monitor enough, document enough, and act fast enough. So just stay on this slide. For everybody who has not encountered me or seen CommLaw Group advisories, I'm Jonathan Marashlian, and I'm the managing partner of the CommLaw Group. We're a boutique telecom firm located in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. I'm also the founder of an affiliated compliance firm that does compliance and consultancy. So my range of expertise is really in regulatory compliance, enforcement defense, robocall mitigation, stir shaken, robocall mitigation database certifications, the traceback issues, call blocking, you name it. Pretty much everything in the entire ecosystem we do. I spend a lot of time with providers answering, a very practical question. What do we actually need to do? Not in theory, not in a law review article, but in the real world on Monday morning with real customers, real traffic, real systems, real contracts, and real resource limits. So today I'm going to keep this plain spoken. I'll talk about the rules. We'll talk about what the FCC has been saying. And we're going to talk about some recent enforcement actions and try to translate all of it into some operational steps. So one quick note, this is a webinar. It's not legal advice for any one company's specific facts. Your facts matter, your traffic matters, your routing model matters, your contracts matter. So just use the information you're going to gain today as a practical framework, but then you're going to have to tailor it to your own business. Next slide, Dan. Next slide. All right, there we go. So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with why KYC matters now. That's the foundation. Because this isn't just a new compliance fashion, it's part of a larger enforcement and network integrity shift. Then we're going to walk through current requirements and expectations. That means the formal rules, the FCC guidance, and the enforcement cases that show us how the FCC thinks when something goes wrong. After that, we're going to talk about the proposed KYC regulations. The April 30th, 2026 further notice of proposed rulemaking is important, not because it's a final rule already, it's not, but because it tells us where the commission's looking and where providers should be getting ready. Then we're going to turn to the KYUP, Know Your Upstream Provider, and that's a different question from KYC. KYC asks who your customers are. KYUP asks you who you're accepting traffic from and who else is part of your call path. And finally, we'll spend meaningful time on practical scenarios, low volume customers, suspicious traffic, record keeping, resellers, wholesale traffic, and how smaller providers can scale this without drowning in administrative work. That last part matters because a compliance program that nobody can actually operate is not a compliance program. It's regulatory theater. Next slide. Next slide, Dan. There we go. The way this is, back up one. The way this is sequenced is intentional. I think we want to back up. There we go. So we're moving from why this matters to what to do about it. That's the arc of the conversation. First is the context, then current expectations, then the proposed rules, then KYUP, then the practical scenarios and takeaways. So if you remember nothing else from this slide, remember this. Robocall mitigation is no longer just about one tool. It's not stir shaking. It's not just traceback. It's not just call blocking. It's not just certifications in the Robocall mitigation database, the RMD. Those pieces still matter. They do matter a lot, but the FCC is increasingly asking a more basic question. How did this traffic get onto the network in the first place? Who let it in? What did they know? What should they have known? And when the warning signs appeared, what did they do? That's why KYC has moved from the edge of the conversation to the center. And that's where we're going to start. Next slide. All right. So why has KYC moved to the center? Because illegal robocalls usually don't magically appear. They enter through relationships, customer relationships, reseller relationships, wholesale relationships, routing relationships. Somebody gets access to the network. Somebody gets the ability to originate traffic. Somebody uses numbers. Somebody sends calls at scale. And if that somebody is a bad actor, the harm can happen very quickly. That's one of the hard realities in this space. A bad actor doesn't need months to cause problems. Sometimes they need hours, sometimes less. Spoofing can scale very quickly. High volume campaigns scale fast. AI-generated messages can scale fast. And once the calls are out, the question becomes backward looking. Who touched this traffic? Who signed it? Who accepted it? Who routed it? Who ignored the red flags? That's the enforcement mindset. The FCC is not just asking whether you collected an application. The FCC is asking whether you took reasonable steps to prevent bad actors from using the voice ecosystem. That's why I like the phrase on this slide. Reasonable KYC is not a form. It's a risk control loop. Onboard, monitor, escalate, then act, and then document what you did. That loop is the heart of the program. Next slide. Actually, I think this is the slide we want to be on. So keep it on, back up one slide. We want to have that KYC right in the center. Yep. So this is where, KYC is at the center of this slide. It's around it are the other robocall mitigation tools that are in use. Stir shaken, the robocall mitigation database, tracebacks, enforcement actions, call blocking. And so let me just translate each one of these. Stir shaken is caller ID authentication. It helps show whether the caller ID was authenticated by the provider in the call path. The robocall mitigation database is where providers certify their mitigation status and practices. Traceback is the process of following suspicious calls back through the network path to identify where they came from. Blocking is what providers do to stop suspect traffic. Enforcement is what happens when the regulators believe the provider failed to meet its obligations. KYC connects to all of these because KYC gives you the factual basis for your decisions. Should I sign this traffic? Should I give this customer an A-level attestation? Should I trust this caller ID? Should I let this campaign continue? Should I respond differently after a traceback? Should I block? Should I suspend? Should I terminate? Those aren't abstract questions, they're operational questions. And the quality of your KYC file often determines whether you can answer them with confidence. Next slide now. All right, so let's talk about expectations. This is an important slide because it captures the shift. The old view was pretty simple. Did we collect an application? That kind of was the intake mindset. Customer wants service, customer fills out form, provider stores the form, done. That's it. That's enough, that's all you did. Now, it's not enough anymore. The current view is different. Now it's can we prove that we knew enough to make a reasonable risk decision? And that's a very different question. It's not just the intake, it's judgment. It's not just data collection, it's risk assessment. It's not just whether the customer gave us answers, it's whether the answers made sense and whether the customer's later traffic matched what they told us. And that last point's critical. KYC doesn't end at the onboarding stage. Onboarding creates an expected profile. Who's the customer? What do they do? What type of calls will they make? How much traffic should we expect? Where will the calls go? What caller IDs will they use? Who's authorized to use those numbers? Monitoring tests that profile. If the customer behaves as expected, great. If the customer starts behaving differently, that variance should trigger a review. Not panic, not automatic termination every time, but a review, and sometimes escalation. Next slide. So practical compliance lives in the overlap, and that's what this slide's getting at. There are formal rules, there are FCC orders and guidance, and there are enforcement actions. Each tells you something different. The formal rule text tells you what is legally required. That matters. But if you only read the rule text, you may miss how the FCC expects the rule to work in practice. Orders and guidance tell you a little bit more about what the expectation is. They show the policy direction. They show what the commission's worried about. Then enforcement actions show how facts are evaluated after something goes wrong. And that's often where providers learn the hard lessons. And I'll be direct here. Enforcement actions can be uncomfortable reading. They're written after the fact. They're written with bad facts in the record. They focus on what failed, but they're still useful because they show what evidence mattered. They show what the FCC reconstructed. They show where the provider story was strong and where the provider story was weak. So when we talk about KYC, don't think about the rule, think about the whole picture. What does the rule say? What's the FCC warned? And if something goes wrong, what will staff be able to do in terms of reconstructing from your records? And that last question it's a quiet killer because if it isn't documented, it's much harder to prove. Next slide. All right, let's get down to brass tacks. Let's get practical. So what should onboarding include? Start with a basic identity, legal name, physical address, tax ID or business registration, a responsible contact, and confirmation that the person requesting service has the authority to act for the customer. That's the floor. For some customers, that might be enough to start. For others, especially higher risk customers, you may need more. Beneficial ownership, controlling persons, related entities, prior names, prior providers, use of resellers. Where's the traffic originating from? Who are the end users? The point's not to ask every possible question every single time. The point is to ask enough to make a reasonable risk decision on a customer by customer basis. So, things like, is this customer making ordinary customer calls, or is it a healthcare office? Is it a school, a church, call center, political campaign, lead generator, debt collector, marketing platform, reseller? Each one of those are different, risk profiles. So different risk profile, they shouldn't get the same type of review. You also need expected volume. expected destinations, expected caller IDs, and expected answers and completion patterns. This gives you a baseline. Then document the basis for any stir, shake, and attestation decisions. If you're going to sign calls, what do you know about the customer? What do you know about the numbers? What do you know about their right to use the numbers? That connection matters. And finally, your contract should support your compliance program. So again, this is talking about what's in your contracts. Your contract should support, should prohibit unlawful traffic. They should prohibit spoofing. They should prohibit abusive campaigns. Your contract should require cooperation. It should require, it should preserve your audit rights. And it should give you operationally usable rights to block, suspend, or terminate traffic when the facts justify it. Not rights that look good, but take 2 weeks and 3 committees to use, but real rights, usable rights in your contract. Next slide. Now let's talk about attestation. This is where KYC and stir, shake, and connect directly. There are 3 basic attestation levels, A, B, and C. A-level attestation means the customer knows, the service provider knows the customer is authorized to use the calling number. Now, A is the highest level. B-level attestation means the provider knows the customer, but can't verify the customer's right to use the number. C-level attestation means the provider can authenticate the gateway or origination point, but not the customer and not the number authorization. So here's the practical point. Attestation is not just a technical act. It's a factual statement. It reflects what the provider knows or what the provider has reason to believe. That means KYC failures can become attestation failures. If the provider gives A-level attestation without enough confidence in the customer and the number use rights, that can create risk. So the question isn't just, can our system sign the call? The question is, should we sign it that way? Do we know the customer? Do we know the number? Do we know the customer is authorized to use that number? Do we have records that show why we made that decision? This is where the operations, engineering, compliance, and legal all need to talk to each other. Because if the KYC team collects information, but the signing logic never sees it, you may have a gap. So if the technical system signs calls one way, but your customer file supports something else, you also may have a gap. And if nobody owns those gaps, enforcement might find them for you. And that's obviously not the ideal discovery process. Next slide. So monitoring is the second half of KYC. This is where many programs either become real or decorative. This slide says compare expected traffic to actual traffic. And that's exactly right. At onboarding, you create an expected profile, use case, volume, destinations, caller IDs, answer and seizure patterns. That profile shouldn't sit in a drawer. It should be tested against real traffic. Now, this doesn't mean every provider needs a giant surveillance operation. It means you need to have a way of spotting meaningful variances, sudden spikes, invalid or spoofed numbers, traffic that appears to impersonate government agencies or well-known brands, high short duration calls, repeated low answer rates, traceback complaints, consumer complaints, unusual destination, dormant accounts that suddenly wake up. A small local business that suddenly behaves like a high volume dialer. Those are signals. Not every signal proves illegal traffic, but signals, should trigger a process. And that process should be relatively simple. Who reviews it? What data do they look at? When do they contact the customer? When do they restrict traffic? When do they suspend? When do they terminate? And where is that decision documented? That's the loop. Variance equals escalation. Maybe small escalation, maybe serious escalation, but escalation nonetheless. Next slide. So now we're going to look at a case study, one of the most important robocall mitigation enforcement stories in recent years, and that deals with Lingo. It matters for KYC because the FCC tied the customer's diligence to stir, shake, and attestation. So the basic allegation was this. KYC failures contributed to incorrect stir, shake, and attestations for spoofed AI-generated political robocalls. These were not ordinary nuisance calls. They involved AI-generated voice cloning. They involved political messaging. They involved spoofing. And they occurred in a highly sensitive election context. The combination of factors matters. Political traffic gets attention. AI-generated voice traffic gets attention. Spoofing gets attention. Election-related deception gets attention. Put them together and you have a case that regulators are very likely to examine closely. Now, when we talk about lingo, we should be careful. An allegation is not the same thing as a final adjudication on every disputed issue. The case also later settled, but for our purposes, the practical lesson is clear. Attestation depends on customer and number use confidence. If you're applying the highest level of attestation, you need the underlying facts to support it. Who's the customer? Who's the caller? Who controls the campaign? Who has the right to use the calling number? What did you verify? What did you document? And if a campaign looks sensitive, unusual, or high risk, did you apply a heightened review? And that last question really matters because reasonable, in quotes, is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. For example, a local pizza shop making calls to confirm orders is not the same as a political robocall campaign using synthetic voice technology. So again, the review should match the risk. Next slide. Next case study is Telnyx. Let's talk about Telnyx. This slide references the FCC's proposed forfeiture of almost $4.5 million. Again, it's a proposed forfeiture. It's a notice of apparent liability. That means it's an allegation. It's not the same thing as a final court judgment, and Telnyx has publicly disputed the FCC's position. That said, it's still a major signal because the FCC used the case to show what it expects from providers when fraud indicators start appearing. The allegation was that Telnyx failed to take affirmative, effective measures to prevent malicious actors from originating illegal traffic. The calls allegedly involved a government imposter scam, and that's a serious fact pattern. Government impersonation is a red flag category. Customers often react differently when they believe a call comes from a government agency. There's fear, there's urgency, there's pressure, and scammers know that. The practical lessons are the ones on the slide. First, KYC is not limited to the initial sign-up. A customer can look acceptable at intake and become risky based on their conduct. Second, fraud indicators should trigger action, not just observation. Action. Third, suspension and blocking rights should be operationally usable. This is where paper programs often fail. A contract might say that you can suspend unlawful traffic, but can your operations team actually do it? Do they know when? Do they need approval? From who? How fast? Can they suspend one campaign, one trunk, one customer, one route, or all traffic? Do they know how to preserve the evidence? The Telnyx case is a reminder. Regulators care about what you do when the warning lights start blinking, not just what your policy says in calm weather. Next slide. So what does reasonable KYC actually look like? Here's the good news. Most providers don't need a bank-grade program, and that's important. Voice providers aren't banks, and not every small provider can or should build a financial institution-style customer identification program. But that doesn't mean no program. It means a right-sized program for your business, a program that matches your customer base, your traffic risk, your size, your automation, your routing model, and your role in the call path. This slide gives a very useful ladder. Baseline, operational, defensible, scalable. Baseline means you collect identity and use case information. You know who the customer is. You know what they say they're going to do. Operational means you compare actual traffic expectations. You define the red flags. You have escalation owners. You can take action. Defensible means you document decisions, approvals, exceptions, customer responses, suspensions, blocking, terminations. Scalable, that means you risk tier customers and automate repeatable controls. You don't treat every customer like a 5-alarm fire, and you don't treat every customer like a walk-in retail account either. Risk tiering is the key. Low risk local business, streamlined review. High volume reseller, more diligence. Foreign customers sending domestic traffic, even more diligence. Political campaign with AI voice tools, more diligence. Customer using numbers it doesn't control, more diligence. The goal is not perfection, the goal is reasonableness. And reasonableness is much easier to show when your process is consistent, documented, and tied to the actual risk. Next slide. Now, why everybody's here, right? The FNPRM. So let's shift to the proposed regulations. The FCC's April 30th further notice of proposed rulemaking is a big deal. A FNPRM is the FCC asking questions and proposing new rules. It's not the same as having actually adopted the final rules, but it does tell us where the commission's heading. And the direction is pretty clear. The FCC is moving from principle-based expectations toward more prescriptive procedures. Principle-based means the rule tells you the goal. Take affirmative, effective measures, know your customers, exercise due diligence. That gives providers flexibility, but it also creates uncertainty. Prescriptive means the rule starts telling you more specifically what to collect, what to verify, what to retain, when to re-verify, and what penalties might apply. And that's the shift. The FNPRM seeks comment on expanded and more specific KYC requirements for originating service providers. It looks at customer identification requirements for new and renewing customers. It looks at verification and re-verification. It looks at retention. It looks at risk-based traffic monitoring. And it looks at enforcement consequences. For providers, the message is simple. Don't panic, but don't ignore it. This is the time to prepare intelligently, not by building a massive process that may have to be redesigned later, but by improving the parts that will matter the most under almost any version of the final rule. Next slide. So if the proposed rules are adopted without any change, and again, that's why we go through the rulemaking process so that parties can come in, comment, advocate, lobby the commission, and shape those rules. So if they were to be adopted as they're currently proposed, the first thing is that onboarding workflows are going to become more prescriptive. That could mean more required fields of information, more verification steps, more scrutiny for certain customer types. Second, customer vetting standards might become clearer. That can be a good thing. Clarity helps, but it also reduces flexibility. Third, record keeping may become more defined. The FCC has specifically looked at how long providers should retain KYC information and supporting records. And fourth, risk-based traffic monitoring might become more formal. That means providers may need to show not only that they collected information, but they used it to monitor traffic. Fifth, penalties might become stronger and more directly tied to calls. And that's important because per call penalty concepts can change the risk math very fast. Here's the compliance design question on the slide. What can be improved now without locking the company into a process that might need to change? And that's the right question to ask at this time. You don't want to freeze your operations around a proposed rule, but you also don't want to wait until the final rule lands and then discover that your intake forms, your contracts, monitoring, and documentation practices are all severely underdeveloped. So the middle path is really the best. Building a durable foundation, make the program modular, use fields that can be expanded, use workflows that can be adjusted, use contracts that give you room to act, and build a culture where compliance decisions are documented as part of ordinary operations. That's going to help no matter how the final rules come out. Next slide. So this is one of my favorite slides in the deck. So prepare now without overbuilding. And that's exactly the right instinct to be having. On the do now side, start with customer intake fields. Inventory them. What are you collecting today? Legal name, physical address, business registration, tax ID, responsible contact, authority, use case, expected volume, number of. If you don't know what you collect, you can't know what gaps you have. Next, map how attestation decisions are made. And this is critical. Who decides whether a customer is getting A, B, or C attestation? Is it automatic? Is it based on the customer type, number assignment? Is it based on a verified right to use record? Is it based on assumptions? You need to know. Then define the red flags and escalation owners. Don't wait for a crisis to decide who owns the decision. Name the compliance owner now. Compliance, operations, network, legal, executive leadership. Who gets called? When? For what? Next, confirm your contract suspension rights. Not just that they exist, confirm that they're usable. Can you suspend traffic for suspected unlawful activity? Can you block specific traffic? Can you demand information? Can you terminate for non-cooperation? Finally, create a documentation habit. This is not glamorous, but it's powerful. Short notes, clear notes, timestamps, customer responses, decision rationale. That's what makes the program defensible. Now, onto the do not do yet side. Don't assume every proposal will become final exactly as written. That's how companies waste money. Don't build an overly complex process that nobody's going to follow. That's how companies create paper risk. Don't treat one form as the entire program. And don't ignore reseller and wholesale realities. Because the voice ecosystem isn't just retail. A lot of risk lies and lives in the indirect relationships. And your program has to reflect that. Speaking of which, let's move to the next slide. And now let's move upstream. Let's turn to the KYUP. So Know Your Upstream Provider, it's related to KYC, but it's not the same thing. KYC asks, who are our customers and should we let them use our network? KYUP asks, who are we accepting traffic from? And what risk are they bringing into the call path? So think of the call path, customers, provider network, upstream and downstream partners. Traffic might originate with your customer. It may pass through your platform. It may route through Viirtue. It may route through another carrier. It may come from a reseller. It may come through a wholesale arrangement. It may involve backup routes. It may involve least cost routing. It may involve multiple vendors. Every one of those relationships can affect risk. KYUP is really vendor risk management for voice traffic. It's asking whether the providers around you have a reasonable robocall mitigation practices, whether they cooperate with traceback, whether they're listed properly in the robocall mitigation database where applicable, whether they accept high-risk wholesale traffic, whether they have a history of problems, whether they'll help you act quickly when something goes wrong. KYC looks inward toward customers. KYUP looks outward and upstream toward provider relationships. Both matter, but they matter differently depending on your network model. Next slide. So let's bring it home. For Viirtue customers, this distinction is especially practical. If Viirtue is your sole upstream provider and you are not independently routing through other carriers and you're not accepting provider-to-provider traffic, your day-to-day KYUP concern is usually going to be low. That doesn't mean zero risk, but the KYUP analysis is simpler. You know who your upstream provider is. You know the primary route. You're not stitching together multiple sources of traffic. You're not accepting traffic from other providers, and that's the simpler model. The higher KYUP concern comes when the routing model gets more complex. Multiple upstream providers and multiple routing partners, backup providers, wholesale reseller traffic from other providers, complicated network arrangements, traffic that's being accepted from unknown or lightly vetted sources. Those are the situations where you need to ask more questions. The rule of thumb on the slide is really good. If you accept traffic from another provider or you route around Viirtue, ask KYUP questions. And that's the practical test. Are you introducing another provider into the call path? Are you taking traffic from a third party? Are you using another route because it's cheaper, faster, or available? Are you accepting traffic where you don't really know the origin? If yes, slow down. Ask KYUP questions, not to create some big bureaucracy, but just to understand your risk. Because if problematic traffic moves through your network, the traceback and enforcement questions might come back to you. And the I didn't ask is not going to be a terribly strong answer when you get contacted by the FCC's Enforcement Bureau. Next slide. So what is minimal practical KYUP diligence? Let's start by identifying your upstream and routing partners, all of them. Primary routes, backup routes, special routes, overflow routes, emergency. If traffic can move there, it should be on the map. Second, confirm robocall mitigation posture. Are they in the robocall mitigation database where applicable? What certifications have they made? Do they have a robocall mitigation plan? You'll see that in the Robocall Mitigation database, and you'll see a lot of them are not really up to snuff. Do they cooperate with traceback? Lots of questions you can ask there. Third, understand whether they accept high-risk wholesale traffic. This matters because your upstream partner's customer can affect your risk. A provider that mainly serves ordinary enterprise customers is different from a provider that accepts large volumes of lightly vetted wholesale traffic. Fourth, require cooperation, traceback, blocking, investigation requests, customer inquiries. You need to know whether the partner will respond quickly, and your contract should support that. Fifth, document routing changes. Why did you add another provider? Why did you shift traffic? Was it quality, cost, redundancy, outage management, compliance? Write it down, document it. That's important. Keep your notes. Sixth, build contractual rights to suspend traffic or change routes. Again, the theme is operational usability. If a provider becomes risky, can you move traffic? Can you stop accepting traffic? Can you demand information? Can you protect your network? KYUP isn't about mistrusting everyone. It's about knowing who is in the call path and making sure your provider relationships don't become your blind spots. Next slide. Now let's move into some practical scenarios. These are the actual questions that providers actually ask. And they're the right questions to be asking because this is where compliance either works or breaks down. First question, how much information is enough for a low volume business customer? The answer is enough to confirm identity, understand their use case, and establish a reasonable traffic profile. For a low volume local business, you likely don't need a deep forensic investigation, but you still need the basics. Legal name, physical address, business registration or tax information, responsible contact, authority to order service, type of business, expected use of the service, expected volumes, expected caller IDs, and some basis for number authorization. And again, I'll just kind of harp on this a little bit because collecting the information is one thing. Are you verifying it? And there are plenty of methods available, and I think Dan will discuss it at the end of the program here, some of the things that Viirtue has been developing and making available so that you can validate that information, not just accept it at face value. And that's a big issue. Accepting a customer's information at face value doesn't go far enough either under the current rules, and it absolutely is not going to be enough under the future rules. So again, let's get back to a practical case scenario. So if it's a dentist's office and it says that it's going to call patients for appointments, create one form, one type of profile. If it's a newly formed entity with no website, no clear address, foreign contact information, and a plan to send high volume outbound calls, it's a completely different profile. Low volume helps, but low volume doesn't erase risk. And remember, customers can change. A customer that starts low volume can become high volume. So the program shouldn't just ask what the customer is today. You need to monitor what the customer becomes. For low volume business customers, I like a streamlined model. Collect the essentials, verify the essentials, set the expected profile, put the customer in a lower risk tier, then monitor for variance. If the customer stays within the profile, great. If the customer suddenly changes behavior, re-review the information. And that's a reasonable thing to do. It's also manageable. Second question, when should suspicious traffic trigger suspension? This is where providers need judgment. Not every anomaly requires suspension. Networks have quirks, customers have seasonal spikes, campaigns change. A snow day may trigger school calls. A doctor's office may have flu season reminders. A utility might have outage notifications. So don't build a program that panics every time traffic moves, but some facts should trigger fast action. Government impersonation, brand impersonation, known scam scripts, traceback requests tied to your customer, invalid or spoofed caller IDs, use of numbers the customer can't explain, high volume traffic that's inconsistent with the customer's stated use case, short duration call bursts, massive spikes from a dormant account, customer refusal to respond to you. false information in the KYC, evidence that the customer is reselling service without permission. These are all serious. In those situations, suspension might be the appropriate course of action. Sometimes the right step is a partial suspension. For example, block a specific campaign, block certain caller IDs, pause outbound traffic, restrict high volume calling, hold new number activations, demand documentation. Sometimes the right step is full suspension though, especially where there is likely unlawful traffic, where there's consumer harm, where spoofing or fraud or non-cooperation is involved. The key is to define your escalation path before that moment arrives. And now let's get into some specific questions here. What can frontline staff do? What requires compliance approval? What requires legal approval? What requires executive approval? How fast must your customer respond? What happens if they don't? Document it. Document everything. Document the signal, the review, document the customer outreach, document the decision, document the action. Suspension, again, it's not punishment, it's network risk control. And that's the right mindset. So the third question, what records should be kept and for how long? Let's start with categories. Keep the customer intake record. Keep your verification records. Keep your business registration evidence. Keep beneficial ownership or control information where it's collected. Keep the use case documentation. Keep the expected traffic profile and number authorization. Keep the attestation rationale. Keep your contracts and your service terms. Keep records of red flags. Keep the monitoring alerts. Keep your traceback requests. And keep your customer responses. Keep the internal escalation notes. Keep the suspension, the blocking, and termination decisions. Keep exceptions. Keep the re-verification records and keep routing changes. Keep your upstream provider diligence and keep records showing who made the decision and when. Now, for how long? And this is one of the areas where the proposed FCC rules are going to matter a lot. The FCC is asked about retaining KYC information in its rulemaking and the supporting records for the period tied to the potential enforcement limitations. So the proposal is specifically discussing 4 years after the termination of the customer relationship. That's the proposed rule, but it's a useful planning signal. My practical advice is this: until the rules are final, don't treat a proposed retention period as a final mandate, but don't ignore it either. For your core KYC and robocall mitigation records, a strong working assumption is to retain them for the life of the customer relationship and for a reasonable period after termination. 4 years after termination is maybe it's a sensible benchmark to evaluate with counsel. You're also going to need to think about privacy and security. KYC records are going to contain sensitive information. So don't collect the information casually. Don't store it loosely. Control access, use secure systems. Know who can see it, know who can change it, know how long it's retained, and know how it's destroyed. Record keeping isn't just about keeping more. It's about keeping the right records in the right place with the right controls. Now, the fourth question. How should reseller and wholesale customers be treated? Simple, with more care. That's the short answer. Not with hostility, not with automatic rejection, but with greater care. Resellers and wholesale customers create indirect risk. You may know your direct customer, but do you know their end users? Do you know their customer screening process? Do you know what traffic they accept? Do you know whether they serve marketers, dialers, lead generators, political campaigns, foreign traffic sources, or other providers? Do you know whether they allow sub-resellers? Do you know whether they can identify the source of a call quickly? All of that matters. For reseller and wholesale customers, the KYC program shouldn't just ask about downstream customers. Not necessarily every end user in every case, but at least the model. Who do they serve? How do they vet them? What traffic do they prohibit? How do they monitor? How do they respond to complaints? Will they cooperate in a traceback? Can they identify the responsible customer quickly? And you can learn from experience. You might have a bad experience with a partner. Document it, be aware. If it happens again, there's a bad apple. Again, more questions. Will they pass through your acceptable use restrictions? Will your partners prohibit spoofing and illegal campaigns? Are they going to preserve their records? Will they terminate bad actors? And again, this is where the contract matters, your contract with your partners. So for reseller and wholesale arrangements, the contract should include flow down obligations, lawful traffic, no spoofing, no illegal robocalls, cooperation with traceback, prompt response to investigation requests. You have to have suspension rights. You have to have termination rights, your audit rights, record keeping. And again, prohibiting sub-reselling without approval, if that's appropriate to your model. Reseller and wholesale traffic is not automatically bad. Plenty of legitimate business moves through those channels, but the risk is layered. So the diligence that you have to conduct should also be layered. Last question. How can smaller providers scale this without drowning in the administrative work? And that's probably the million-dollar question for the audience on today's call. For many providers, it's really the most important one. The answer is not to copy a large carrier's compliance program. That usually is going to fail. The answer is to build a right-sized system. Start with the risk tiers: low risk, medium risk, high risk. Then define what each risk tier requires. Low risk customer, basic identity verification. What's the clear use case for their business? Low expected volume, known business, normal traffic. For a medium risk customer, more review, more of a use case detail needs to be obtained. Increased monitoring, maybe more number authorization records. Now we move to the high risk customer. That's where the enhanced diligence comes in play. Check the beneficial ownership, traffic source questions, campaign details, require stronger approvals, more frequent monitoring, and possible legal review. That structure, the tiered structure, lets you scale. Next, use standard templates, standard intake forms, standard contract provisions, standard escalation notes, standard customer inquiry emails, standard suspension notices, standard exception memos. Templates aren't glamorous, but they do save time and they improve consistency. Then automate what's repeatable. Business identity checks, missing field alerts, traffic spike alerts, invalid caller ID flags, volume thresholds, dormant account reactivation, trace backtracking, customer response. Keep humans in the loop for judgment calls. Automation can flag risk, but humans still need to evaluate the context. Also, assign ownership. And this is one of the biggest failures in small organizations. It's not bad intent, it's ambiguity. Everybody assumes someone else owns the issue. So name the owner. Who owns intake? Who owns attestation logic? Who owns the traffic monitoring? Who owns the traceback responses? Who owns suspension decisions? Who owns the retention record? You don't need 10 departments, but you do need clear responsibility. Finally, build a documentation habit that takes minutes, not hours. A short, consistent note is better than a perfect memo that never gets written. For example, traffic spike detected, customer contacted, customer explained campaign, number authorization provided, traffic allowed to continue, or customer failed to respond, outbound traffic suspended, customer advised, review set for tomorrow. That level of documentation can make a real difference. The goal isn't to drown the business. The goal is to protect it. Next slide. So let's pull all of this together. 5 takeaways. First, KYC is now central to demonstrating reasonable robocall mitigation. That's the big shift. It's not just a customer intake exercise. It's the evidence that you took reasonable steps to keep bad actors off the network. Second, the operational standard is being shaped by enforcement as well as by the rules text. Read the rules, but also pay attention to the cases. Lingo shows the connection between KYC and attestation. Telnyx shows the importance of action when fraud indicators appear. Again, those cases have their own procedural posture and disputed facts, but they're instructive. Third, onboarding, attestation, monitoring, escalation, and documentation. They all need to connect. And this is probably the most operational takeaway of the day. If onboarding collects information, but monitoring never uses it, you have a gap. If attestation decisions are made without reference to number authorization, you have a gap. If monitoring spots red flags, but nobody owns the escalation, you have a gap. If you act, but you don't document it, you have a proof gap. the program has to connect, and that's really important. Connect all the dots. Fourth, the FNPRM, the rulemaking, points towards more prescriptive requirements in the future. Doesn't mean they're all going to become final rules. It does mean providers should prepare. Inventory your intake, review your contracts, map your attestation logic, define your red flags, build documentation habits, prepare without overbuilding. And I do think Dan's going to have a thing or two to say about that, and I'm going to preserve some time at the end so he can fill everybody in on what Viirtue has been developing and rolling out. So fifth, KYUP. It matters when provider relationships or routing arrangements, or routing arrangements create upstream risk. Again, as I said earlier, if Viirtue is your sole upstream provider and you're not accepting provider-to-provider traffic, the KYUP analysis is pretty simple. If you use multiple upstreams, accept wholesale traffic, route around Viirtue, or rely on lightly vetted sources, you got to ask more questions. Know who's in the call path, know who will accept, traffic, who's going to cooperate, know how you can act based on your contract. The practical North Star is right here on this slide. Know enough, monitor enough, document enough, and act fast enough. That's the model. It's not perfection, it's not panic, it's not bureaucracy. It's reasonable, operational, defensible program. Next slide. So I'm going to go ahead and close with this. Robocall mitigation is not going away. The tools are going to change. The rules will evolve. The FCC is going to continue to push providers towards more active prevention, and bad actors are going to continue adapting. So the best compliance programs aren't static. They're living systems. They learn from customers. They learn from traffic. They learn from enforcement. They learn from traceback. They learn from complaints, and they adjust. That's what KYC should be. Not a form. It's a loop. Onboard, monitor, escalate, act, document, improve. And KYUP is the companion idea. Know who your customers are and know who's helping to carry the traffic. So if there's one thing that you take back to your team, take this. Don't wait until a traceback, a subpoena, or an FCC letter to figure out what you know. Figure it out now, before the traffic moves, before the red flags pile up, before the story has to be reconstructed by an enforcement staffer from the FCC. Start small if you need to, inventory your process, find the gaps, fix the easy ones, assign the owners, talk to Viirtue. And with that, just want to thank everybody and hand it over to Dan and the team at Viirtue to maybe field questions or, again, fill everybody in on the things that Viirtue is going to be doing for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. This is super informative. We do have a bunch of questions. Want to hang on? Want to hang on? Try and answer as many of those.
And as Jonathan had mentioned, if you're already a partner of Viirtue, you're already using our VoIP platform, there are things you can do today. There are things you can do today that at least you can get started, like Jonathan had mentioned, using our Google address validation is a legitimate address. Customers are providing things like that. We do. Sign up with us. You sign up with us. You on our MSAs, your EIN, our team, that EIN. Before we even through the sales funnel, legitimate.
Sorry, Dan.
Legitimate business. Yeah.
Will you turn your mic off on your screen sharing? It's double volume.
No worries. Doing that right now.
It was sounding like Lou Gehrig's speech in his retirement.
Oh, yeah, the Yankee Stadium. Is that better, guys? Is that better, guys?
Yes.
Awesome. Sorry about that. So long story short, there's a lot that you can do today to obtain and set yourselves up for success. But as you can imagine, we're watching the updates to this closely, and we'll have updates on if anything proceeds. But let's go ahead and get to Q&A. There's a bunch of questions in here, and again, thank you guys for the great attendance for this webinar. First question: there was a handful of these. Could we get a copy of the slides? Can I forward this over to my team, copy this meeting? So the answer is a resounding yes to all of those. If you registered for the webinar, you'll likely get a replay link right after this in your inbox where you can watch it. We also generally upload these to YouTube right after. So please, feel free to share it along with whoever you think you might need to view it. Next question was from David. Jonathan, this question was, why should a consumer answer a be attested? Let me see if I can put it up on the screen. Why should a consumer answer a be attested call? Doesn't the B signature indicate that the originating provider
has it gone through the trouble to verify that the caller is using the calling number properly? If they won't put in the effort to do that, why should the recipient answer the call? Oop, you're muted there, John.
So maybe the framing of the question is a little bit off, because if I'm the call recipient, I have no idea how it's been attested. I don't know how the calling party has been attested. I'm not seeing ABC, right? The A, B, and C is in the call path, and providers that are in the call path and the terminating provider, depending on that attestation level, A's are going to go through. They're likely not going to be labeled as spam or spam likely by the companies that are engaged in that process of assigning those labels. B, they're still going to get through. You're not going to notice any diminution in the quality of the termination of a B attestation, or at least you shouldn't. When calls are attested at a C level, that's when they start getting flagged with a greater frequency. And again, a lot of it depends on who your downstream terminating service providers are. Whether or not the Cs are getting filtered through the companies that are assigning those labels. That C attestation level is one of the big flags that they incorporate into their logic.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Jonathan. And then the next question was from, I don't believe we're going to be able to get through all these, but we'll do our best. The next question was specific to monitoring where a provider may need to listen to the traffic. Do you reckon data protection laws can limit or create hurdles to meet robocall mitigation obligations?
Yeah, and this is one I've been dealing with a lot, because the single most effective way to prevent fraud from happening on the network is to actively listen to a live call. But we live in a country with privacy laws. We live in a world that respects privacy, at least most of it. There's certain countries that probably do not. But in the US, we've got two-party consent states and we've got one-party consent states. In the one-party consent states, if you're calling from a one-party consent state, you're the party that consents to the call being recorded. And as long as you're providing that notification at the beginning of the call, this call may be monitored for quality assurance purposes, you may monitor that call for quality assurance purposes. It's when you don't provide that notice, or when you're operating in a two-party consent state, where it becomes very, very dicey. You risk violating wiretap laws, and that's a serious offense, civilly as well as criminally. So, should you start monitoring, or when do you start listening to the calls? First piece of advice there: consult with counsel. Don't take anything I'm going to say as gospel, because the facts are going to differ based on, the outcome's going to differ based on your specific facts, based on what you're capable of doing at the network level and what you're doing to, again, provide notice that calls are being listened to. And remember, regular calls, like if I pick up the phone and I'm making a phone call, I'm not getting that notification. My call party's not getting that notification. Those types of notices that allow you to live listen into a live conversation for quality assurance purposes. Again, those sorts of things are more enterprise level call centers and so forth. You know the different experience, and there's going to be a different threshold for each one of those different scenarios. So my best piece of advice is get advice from counsel with respect to your specific fact pattern.
Awesome. And I did see some notes here in the question. I hope my echo is fixed. Sorry, guys. And I only have about another minute here. So I'll try to answer a few of these. The ones that we don't answer, I will try and run through after, get them to Jonathan so we can answer them offline. One of the next questions is, for the monitoring aspect, if the client isn't going over their set allowance of messages or calls, then how would we know they are sending, example, political, fraud, spam messages or calls? Are we supposed to actually read their messages or listen to their calls?
Again, the live call listening, let's take that off the table, right? If the network analytics are not catching it because of spikes or patterns, then you're right. It's difficult to identify. It really is. If you get feedback, if you get a phone call, customer complaint, if you hear something and it ties back, you see something being, publicized. Sometimes there are external, factors that you become aware of that will alert you to something that's happening. Oftentimes you won't. And that's where it gets back to sometimes you're not going to know that there is nefarious activity happening, illegal activity happening, that could get you in trouble simply by doing the network analytics. It may not be enough. But again, it's always going to be a totality of the circumstances. And that's where all of the guidance I've been providing about having the process, having it documented, coming prepared to show your homework and to demonstrate there's no other way we could have prevented this from happening. We did everything within our power. And the only other way we could have done it is to basically violate the law and do live call listening and violate the wiretap laws. So it's the totality of the circumstances. That's why throughout the entire webinar, I was giving many, many different examples, because it's not a one size fits all. It's a layering approach. Again, a lot of the things that you're doing with with Viirtue, that's going to matter. What information you're able to get from Viirtue and what they're capable of doing on your behalf, that matters. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. And we're a little over on time here. So again, thank you guys so much. I know there's a bunch of other questions. We will try and get back in here and try and answer them for you as best as we can. Again, this recording will be distributed. And again, we post this on YouTube generally after. But thank you all for taking time out of your busy day. It was a really important topic. We had a good feeling it was going to get good attendance. Thank you so much again, Jonathan, for putting together this presentation and for presenting for us. And of course, always Mel, Gil, all the folks in the background here at Viirtue that helped put this on, put this stuff together. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Talk to you on the next one.
Thank you.